fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Now, all the way from the UK, Mr. Gavin Stone, Spy Select, is here.
Thank you for having me back. It seems you never learn a lesson.
No, well, we got to have our comedy content, right? So we...
That's it. I see. I'm someone to laugh at.
So listen, we've got Gregory Stout here, and I know he's got a 4-book series called A Jackson Gamble Novel. Let's see what's going on here. So welcome to the show, Greg.
Thank you.
Where were you hurt? At what age? Young age? Like what brought you? Why would you get into writing?
Well, actually, the first time I tried to write something, I think I was an undergrad at university, and this was in Lawrence, Kansas, and there was an election. And there was a kind of a hippie grad student who ran for the office of Justice of the Peace, which in that particular county, the only thing that he could do was perform marriages and settle lawsuits of $1 or less. And I thought, geez, that would be kind of an interesting thing to turn into some sort of a mystery. And I took a stab at it, and I wrote about half of it. And I realized it was a piece of crap, and so that was sort of the end of that. And I let it lay till the early 1980s when I was commuting on the train to work. I was living in Chicago at the time, and I was commuting on the train, and I didn't have a job where I had to take work home with me, so I had the morning and the afternoon train ride to kill. And I was reading a lot of mysteries on the train because that's what I like to do. And I thought some of them were pretty good, and some of them I thought, you know what, I can do better than that. And so it was really literally wrote on college-ruled lined paper using a pencil on the train. And it took a while, but I got it done. And it only took 40 years later, I was an overnight success. It got published.
Well, there, you see, it's a 40 years worth investing, you know?
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know. Well, now that you're really rich and rolling in the cash and...
Yeah, that's it.
and a big star. Okay, so you started writing, get into this. What kind of a writer would you consider yourself?
Oh, no, I think I'm pretty damn good. My first novel, Lost Little Girl, won the Seamus Award back in 2022 for, best first PI novel. So I was very encouraged by that. And then, of course, the next year I couldn't enter because they made me a judge. So, I'll try it again this year.
Do awards mean something to you? Or is that important?
Well, they would mean a lot more to me if they came with cash. This one came with a plaque, and it got me some attaboys. But, it's hard to tell because we interview authors on our own show, and, of course, I interact with my publisher has about 200 authors under contract, and a lot of them have either won some sort of award or they've been a finalist in some sort of award. And I'm not sure that the distinction makes any difference when you're trying to promote what you're doing. But it maybe means something to other authors. I'm not sure that it means something to, it's not like the Nobel Prize.
I think it might to help for the reader if they can see that it's an award-winning book as well, if it's on the cover, or an award-winning author, that kind of thing. I think these things, blurbs and things on the jacket do, definitely help a little bit. I think maybe 2 or 3 times, and I've bought 100, probably thousands of books, I have spotted 1 or 2 little things, maybe be a blurb, and gone, okay, and it's just, I was on the verge of buying it, and it's just tipped me over the edge to say, yeah, I will.
Well, people look at the cover, and then they turn around and they look at the little bitty blurb on the back cover, and that's pretty much what drives their decision, I think, unless they're familiar with the author.
Yeah, it definitely gets some that are kind of, they're so kind of almost stuck on an author, no matter what he puts out next, they go, that's it, I'm buying his book, they're familiar with the writing style and enjoy the work, so they become very loyal, don't they?
Well, it's kind of like if you're into, Blue Bloods, or on your side of the pond, somebody like Vera, you get to know the character, and you begin to feel like somehow you're connected with their lives and what it is that they're doing, and you want to see what they're doing next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a comfort zone. It's like eating at a McDonald's or or a Tim Horton or whatever you've got in the UK that's analogous, where you know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Well, and as soon as I see Gavin's picture on the back of the book, I've got to have it.
Really.
Yeah, it's the best kind of book to have in your bathroom.
Yeah. In other words, it's cheaper than toilet paper. Oh dear. So yeah, with Jackson Gamble, I mean, how much of yourself and your own personality is kind of within Jackson Gamble? Tell us about the origins of him as a character.
I think personality-wise, a lot of it. Maybe, I don't know, because I've spent most of my life dealing with other people. I ran sales and marketing for a billion-dollar manufacturing company, and I was in the private sector for 27 years. I talked to a lot of customers. Later on, I actually taught in the public school system for 12 years, and you learn how to talk to people, and you learn how not to say silly things, and I try not to have my characters say silly things, because I mentioned to you that after I won that award, I was asked to be a judge the next year, and I was absolutely snowed under with a blizzard of contest entries, and I read about half of them. And sometimes, you read the thing and you just go, that's not what a reasonable person would do. So that tends to put me off the thing. When I write, I think about what would a sensible person do next, realizing that at some point somebody in that book's got to get killed.
Yeah, I'm still working on that, not being able to not say silly things personally in my own life. So as for my writing and my characters, I probably need some lessons off you there. I think, Gregory, I'm going to have to come over to the States and there's a saying that you are apparently the mean average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So yeah, perhaps I need to spend a little bit of time with you and get some of that sensibility or sensibleness to rub off on me a little bit, I think.
Well, somebody once said that if the smartest person in Iowa moved to Missouri, the collective IQ of both states would go down. You might want to keep that in mind when you think about trying to glean something from me.
Well, there you have it. And the main character, the different characters you have in that, how do you experience them? Like, are you able to hear their voice, or do you see them like a movie? What's your own personal work through with characters?
I hear the voices. I hear voices. I don't visualize them as much as I just think about what would it... Here, I cut my teeth reading mysteries by people like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, and later on Dennis Lehane. And it's kind of a dry wit, I think, in there, and a sort of a tendency to be direct. A lot of the mystery writers that I know write cozies, where there's a little lady and she has a cottage and a cat and she bakes cookies, and she goes to the jumble, and then on the side she solves mysteries. I don't ask my characters to talk like that. If you think about anything that that Agatha Christie did, she never comes straight at her reader. I guess I do.
Did you pick Nashville specifically for Jackson Gamble, or is that just the first book?
I picked that because when I started writing, we had lived there back in the 1870s. And at the time, of course, it's not the same city anymore. When we were there, it was 480,000 people. Now it's 1 million. When I have to describe a setting, I have to go on Google Street View to see what it looks like now, because most of what I knew isn't there anymore. But I picked it because I thought, well, it's a big enough city. It has a certain cachet because of the music industry that's connected to it. And it hasn't been done to death. I think there's been any number of mysteries that have been done in New York City or Los Angeles or a handful of other places. Chicago comes to mind. Boston. And so I thought, well, let's try something else.
Yeah, and I was there in 2019 or 2020 in Nashville, and I've got to admit, for some reason, it wasn't like what I expected. I'd got this vision in my mind of what I thought it would be, and I got there. It was like party central here in the main city, and it was wonderful. It was a great experience, and I absolutely loved it. But a million miles away from what I expected to be. So it's nice to see that. So you've gone somewhere different rather than the default setting of LA that most people, or New York that most people go for. And
and I've been in those cities, but I just wanted something different. I was down in Nashville last summer for the BoucherCon conference, and we stayed at a hotel that was out by where the Opryland Park used to be. It was called it was a Marriott hotel, and it was The first day that I was there, it was so big, it took me literally 25 minutes to find my way back to the parking lot. And that hotel was full. There were 3 different conventions going on. So it's very much now a tourist town. It's very much now a convention city. And you're right, it very much is a party city, because anything, I'll say, between where the old Union Station was on about 12th Street and the river, it's just one kind of honky-tonk after another.
So a lot of the storylines throughout your series, do you take from real events? Do they influence you, kind of how you write the stories and what happens to your characters, or are they just imaginary?
I sometimes make reference to things that are in the news, but I try to stay away from a lot of that because, well, here, when I wrote the first book, I wrote it in 1983. And when it finally got published, which was in 2020, a lot of the temporal references had to be changed out because there were no more, there were no more payphones, and gas didn't cost 50 cents a gallon anymore. And so I try to stay away from that a little bit so as not to date the thing.
So now your characters, what point of view are you writing this from? Is there one person or several people, or is it your own?
First person, it's much easier for me to manage. It is, I think, a little harder to put the story together because a lot of times when you're reading something where there are multiple characters and you're getting inside their heads, what you're getting is kind of the same storyline presented over and over again, just with different points of view. And so I think you can have a more compact storyline. In my own case, seeing the story through the eyes of my character, so it has to keep moving ahead. So it's easier for me to manage the character, but it's harder for me to put the story together.
Now, what's the premise of the series itself? Like, let's do that for listeners so they know kind of what is the basic format of what goes on.
Well, Gamble is a private detective. He was like most private detectives. He was an ex-cop. He was a uniform starting out, and then he made sort of a junior detective, and he was assigned to the district attorney's office, and he got wind of a political corruption that involved a circuit court judge, and he began to investigate that, and he was told to lay off because it was an election year and nobody wanted the hassle and went with it, but he didn't lay off, and as a result, he was basically on the way to getting fired, and he decided to go into business for himself because he wants to do the right thing, and he doesn't always know how to go about it, and he doesn't always get the results that he hopes for, which is kind of the element of noir that's in that story, which is that sometimes the best you can do is break even. Sometimes the bad guy gets away with it.
Kind of, I'm just looking at the series here, and I'm looking at the like your background. So continuity-wise, where do you go when it comes to things like police investigators and private investigators? Do you have friends in those circles that you approach and ask for how the operations are done and that kind of thing?
Actually, I do now. I picked up. I have a friend in Nashville who was a special agent in charge with ATF, and so sometimes I run things past him. I have a couple of attorney friends. I have a friend here in where I live who is a circuit court judge, and I actually ran across, or I made a fan out of a working PI in Tennessee, so I can sometimes check with him and see, are we even close to being legal with what we're doing here? Yeah, because it's important. There's fiction and then there's fantasy. If you're writing fantasy, you can go to some other world and solve the problems of the people on another planet. I think you have to get the details right. And that's why I've spent a lot of time learning kind of how the music industry works, because eventually somebody who does know that business will pick up the book and say, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and then that's the end of that. So I think it's incumbent on us to get the details right. In this most recent book, one of the characters was he was a Jewish professor at a university, and he died. And so there was a funeral for him, and I had to check with some friends to see exactly what does a Jewish funeral look like, because I've never been to one. But I figured somebody who does know would eventually read that book and again say, well, hooey.
Are you taking in modern times, so to speak? Are you thinking about how people are today when you're doing books from 80s and upwards? Like, even if you've updated it somewhat, are you taking into the let's say the personal attitudes toward things? Are you concerned? Because especially when you're writing police or even fiction and stuff, it can be kind of harsh, right? That sense of humor that you were talking about, the dry wit and stuff, it might not always be acceptable in today's day.
Well, the books are set in the present day. With each of the books, my character gets a year older, and his lady friend gets a year older, and their relationship progresses. And I think I'm fairly aware of popular culture, and now that having been said, we tried to watch the Golden Globes the other night, and I had never seen or even heard of most of the things that won awards. So, I guess in that regard, I'm somewhat out of touch, but I think I do know how people behave, and I certainly know what's acceptable.
That's the most important thing at the end of the day, is human behaviour. And I think the best advice I was given a while ago was about when it came to writing, which I thought was fantastic, was don't do complicated plots, do simple plots with complicated characters. And if you like you say, if you know about human behaviour and you know what's acceptable, then that's definitely the best foundation for it, really.
Well, that's true. And if you're doing a mystery, I think when you get to the end, the reader maybe didn't see it coming exactly the way you did, but they need to be able to say, oh, I should have seen that. It was all there. So you can't have a telegram show up in the next to the last chapter like Agatha Christie sometimes did. And if you had read that telegram, you'd know who did it, but because you couldn't, you didn't. And I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, there is that. When it comes to writing your main characters, do they ever surprise you? Do you ever kind of go out in one direction thinking, I'm going to make this happen in the book, and then later on you go a completely different way, think actually this is going to be better, and it's something that's unexpected that happens?
The first two books I wrote, I sort of storyboarded them, and I knew kind of from one chapter to the next that's what the plot line was going to be and how it was going to resolve itself. And then I got to the third one, and I couldn't make that work at all. And so I had to it's like the book I'm working on now. I wrote the first chapter, and now I'm thinking, okay, where do we go from here? And then where do we go after that? And I've lost that ability that I had to, sort of storyboard the thing. And now I'm just to see what happens. I remember I took a lit class when I was an undergrad, and I think somebody referred to Emil Zola. This is probably higher tone than what you're used to getting. And he was a proponent of something called the experimental novel, where that's exactly what he did. He said, I just create these characters and I see what they do. And hopefully they do something that's interesting.
Are you writing with the reader in mind?
Yes.
When you write from the reader in mind, does that influence sometimes? Does that make you change your story?
I'll tell you, one thing I'm very careful about in my books is how I treat women, because I'm assuming that some X number of women will read the book, and I'm very careful to be respectful of them, and I'm very careful not to in any way demean them or minimize their contributions to whatever it is going on. So I'm sensitive to that kind of stuff.
And is there ever a lesson within the kind of subtext of the books, or something for the reader to take away, mull on, chew on, or think about after they've finished? Do they go away? And do you tend to put anything like a political message in there in the subtext, or do you avoid politics altogether when it comes to the writing?
No, I pretty much steer clear of politics. The lesson, I guess, if there is a lesson, it's that sometimes things just don't work out. Sometimes the best you can do is break even. I guess it was in the third book, at the end of it, somebody gets away with it. Somebody doesn't, and somebody does. But I will probably bring that character back in another book and settle up with. Just not this time.
No, I'm going to probably steal one of Alan's questions here as well with this, because I'm just wondering if you ever meet somebody and take a real disliking to them and think, right, I'm putting you in a book later on in life and I'm going to make your life hell. In my book, you're going to be a character and I'm going to punish you.
I don't think I've ever done that.
Oh, you should give it a try. It's almost therapeutic.
I can't manage that many characters.
Yeah. So where do you go from here? What do you've got 4 books out here. Are you going to continue this series, or are you going to jump into something different?
Here's what happened with that, and I'm going to back up a little bit. When I was at the end of my working life, I was teaching in a middle school. I don't know what they call them in the UK, but here it would be kind of before you get to high school and after you get out of the grade school. And I had 8th graders, and among other things, I was mostly teaching 20th century U.S. history, which was easy for me because I lived through half of it. But, beyond that, I taught, among other things, a section of reading every year. The very last quarter, the district took pity on me and they gave me a student teacher. And so she had to kind of run the ship the best way she could, which was not very well. She stood up in front and waved her arms and did her best to maintain order with mixed success. But I had nothing to do, and I couldn't leave the room. So I thought, well, I've read probably 100 middle grade books, and I bet I can write one. And I did. And that was actually the first thing other than the nonfiction books that I got published. And so then I wrote a second one of those, and it was only after then that I decided I was going to dust off these mysteries. And so I dragged one of them into the present day, and I sent it out, and I think it went to 10 publishers, and 4 of them wanted it. But one of them offered me a 3-book contract, and so that was the one that I took. And we finished that one up, and they said, well, how would you like to have another contract? And I said, sure. So, the 4th one is out. The 5th one is done. I don't owe that to them until April, so I'm going to continue this series for at least, I'm working on book 6. I just started on it the other day, and I got about 2,500 words, and they're terrible. But, I'll get it. And then after that, I'm not sure.
Are you willing to give us a little teaser for the next book, or can you tell us where if there's a base or something that you can let us know a little bit about?
Yeah, okay. The next one is called Goodbye is Forever. And it's about Gamble gets hired he's actually hired by a man who's sitting on death row in a penitentiary in Tennessee. His death sentence has been commuted to life because he's dying of pancreatic cancer, and the state figures it's easier to just let him die on his own than continue to keep fighting these appeals. So he contacts Gamble and he says, I have not seen my daughter for 10 years, and I would like to speak to her one more time before I shuffle this mortal coil. And so that is what sets the story in motion. She was at one time she was in a kind of a band, and it wasn't very successful, and she drifted down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, which is another big recording town. It's not a big town, but it's a kind of a mini epicenter of a certain kind of recording. And so he goes down to Alabama, and eventually, well, either he finds her or he doesn't.
Mm-hmm. So we'll have to find out.
Yeah, you're going to have to buy the book, buddy.
I will do. Thank you.
There you go. Are you keeping a series Bible or some sort of a book that kind of keeps the continuity and stuff as you write a series like this? I've
written a resume for some of the main characters, yeah. And there are recurring characters. There's a couple of detectives that he runs across very often. One is she's actually a female black gay detective, and so I can do some kind of interesting things with her story, and I'm going to do that in the book that I'm writing now. There are certain attorneys that he runs across. There are certain organized crime people that he crosses paths with every now and then. Because I think, again, that helps the reader to get a sense of this isn't all just random.
Yeah, and who do you find your main audience is for the Gamble series? Is it a very mixed audience, or is there like a set age or like kind of demographic, or do you not follow that?
Well, good question. I did a book signing here right before Christmas at our local Barnes & Noble, and 35 people bought the book. I would say most of them were over the age of 40 or so, men and women alike. But it's, they're not written for children. They're not profane, and they're not graphic, and they're not violent, and there's no creepy sex or anything like that. But I think you just have to be maybe a certain age to sort of get what I'm talking about. And you have to have a certain life experience. The young adult books, they're different. They were written for teenage boys, because nobody writes for boys.
Do you ever come across a series on, like when you're watching some of these channels and you see a series come on and you kind of maybe see an idea or a storyline and thought, that would have been great, or something, I was going to do that and somebody beat me to it. Do you ever come across that?
Vera is good. Foil is good. I've burned through Inspector Gently. I like that series. Here, not to the same degree, because a lot of these things tend to be formulaic. So maybe what I watch is we have this station here, TCM, which shows mostly old movies. And on Saturday night, they have a thing called Noir Alley, which is a bunch of film noir from the late 30s, I'll say, to the early 1950s. And some of them are British films. Most of them are, they would be B-list films. And sometimes you can, it's like being a musician. You don't steal the other guy's music, but maybe you borrow from it just a little bit. George Harrison found out about that, didn't he?
Oh, that's true, yeah. So, yeah, Vera's quite popular here, actually, to be fair, amongst quite a wide demographic. It's very surprising. It was something that I expected to be maybe more popular with the older generation, but it's quite loved amongst a good mix of people.
Well, we've been through 8 seasons so far, and I did see the other day where the last episode has been recorded.
Really?
Yeah, after 14 seasons, and I'm going to miss that. I hope they talk her out of retirement.
Not bad going, though, for 14 seasons, to be fair.
But your seasons are different, aren't they? Here they run 26 episodes, and when I was a kid, they ran 39 episodes. And it looks like a season in the UK and in Australia and in New Zealand. We watch those also. They tend to be 6 to 8 episodes.
Yeah, it's I think it's something to do with the way TV's aired over here, and they'll put like maybe one a week on over a certain part of the year, and then when that part of the year over, they'll move on to the what's flavour of that next particular quarter or whatever. So yeah, it's a bit weird. Either that or somebody somewhere said, "Hang on, if we put less episodes in a DVD box set, we can make more money."
Well, the one thing that you all do is the episodes tend to be an hour and a half rather than an hour, and I think it gives the story itself a little more room to breathe.
Yeah.
So it's a little more depth to it, and the plots are a little bit better thought out.
Let's see. Let's give out your information. Where do people find Gregory? Is there a website, social media?
There is. I have a website. It's amazingly enough, it's GregoryStoutAuthor.com. I have a Facebook page, which I'm not quite sure what it is, but if you go to Facebook and type in my name, I will pop up, and you may or may not like it, but I will pop up. And of course, there's a number of mystery writer Facebook groups, which I discovered recently, and so I've signed on to all of those. Not terribly hard to find.
Well, fantastic. Now we're going to put all that up along with your books. People can find it easily and find you, and it's been a pleasure. I'm glad you came on.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Now, the series is called A Jackson Gamble Novel, and it's Gregory Stout. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.